Absent excuse. Excellent. Thank you. Welcome. Regular meeting of the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission. This is Wednesday, May the 10th. I call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Cookie, if you would please take the roll.
Commissioner Narita?
Here.
Commissioner Redelmeyer?
Here.
Chair Robbins?
Here.
Vice Chair Rowinski?
Here.
And Commissioner Michael is absent and excused.
Great, thank you very much. A little bit of process for those attending in person. I see you out there. If you want to speak at any of the items, fill out a yellow slip. If participating remotely, you can use the raise hand feature in Zoom. You'll be called at the appropriate time. If calling in via phone, press *9 to raise your hand, and when called upon, press *6 to unmute. So, first item is the consent calendar, and these are the minutes of our April 12th meeting. Anybody have any questions or comments on those minutes? Hearing none, could I hear a motion to move approval?
I motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second, just to keep it moving. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you very much. Now we're on the public comment. This is the time if anybody wants to speak, either here in the chambers or remotely on items that are not on the agenda. Cookie, do we have any yellow slips or folks online?
I have no yellow slips, and I do not see anybody with a raised hand.
Excellent. Give a few seconds, no raised hands. I'll close the public comment and we'll go on to new business. This is the informational item. We're going to, on transportation management in the city of San Mateo. Madam Director or staff, by all means, please.
So, Jay, if you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'll take it away. Let me share my screen real quick.
Is everyone's screens working? Mine, through the chair, sorry. Mine is up.
Yeah, we don't have anything on ours.
I
it
have
on now?
I have my screen.
Okay.
Oh.
Started to.
All right, it's flashing.
And it's gone.
And it's gone.
She still has it.
Okay. The staff PC button is clicked. So it should be shared.
It's working at
I see it on these
4
two.
o'clock.
I do not.
All right, well, let's try that again. Click it again. Hopefully it'll work.
Technology is killing us.
Oh, it's not.
Now show hers.
I lost it.
And I'll click it again. Hopefully it
It's
resets.
back.
We do not.
Okay, so it's something with these.
All right.
And you've got it turned on? I mean, it's, oh,
Well, I have a seat here. If any, no, I'm just kidding.
If we can fix it quickly, great. If not, we can all
see if Segal's is on.
Yeah, I could try it again. I'll click it away.
It is on these two. It's not on. It was on this one, but not on this one.
And I'll click it again. Staff PC.
So there is this.
Something's not connected, potentially.
Yeah, it was intermittent.
I'm not going to name names. Perhaps somebody at the council wasn't happy.
So there is one right here, and I guess.
glasses. Oh, these are not working too. Oh, okay. All right. I'll slide down there.
Two more. Yeah, I'll just sit here. And how's that? Great.
Whoa!
They all just went on.
Mine just went on?
Okay, so it's working.
No,
No.
Oh, you're good?
Yeah, it's working all across.
I didn't even do anything.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Yeah, it just took time. All right, let's get the show on the road. All right, good evening, commissioners. Yeah. Good evening, commissioners. JU Public Works Engineer Manager, and tonight I'll be going over a presentation to discuss transportation management in the city of San Mateo. First, we're gonna break this down into a couple of chapters. First, we're gonna discuss why is transportation management important. Then we're gonna talk about how did we get here, talk about our mission internally, and then how do we achieve a healthy transportation network. And then lastly, we'll end it on challenges. But first, let's talk about what is included in the transportation network. Well, there are a lot of different assets that we can talk about. Obviously, some of the usual suspects are roadways or highways or interchanges, but our transit stations, signals, streetlights, bridges, pedestrian bridges, parking lots, sidewalks, bike lanes are all included, but there are more, but I can't fit it on the slide. It's quite vast. And you might be wondering, well, why is the transportation management important? Well, first, it really is the backbone for us to get from point A to point B. I'm pretty sure every one of us utilize one type of mode to get here, but it is really vital as the backbone of our society. Two, it's efficiency. A well-managed network alleviates congestion. It makes the network reliable so you can depend on it. And environmental sustainability is really important. As we have limited right-of-way, the more vehicles that we could get off the roads, the more carbon emissions we can reduce, and so on. And if you have a strong infrastructure, you have reduced congestion and a sustainable network, it overall leads to a better quality of life. But let's start from the beginning. How do we get here? Well, I think we're all familiar with the general plan. We have multiple general plans and it gets updated over time. We're currently doing an update as well. And this plan is really our vision, our guiding star, if you will, of how we built out our network. In here, we develop goals, objectives, and policies specific to land use, housing, noise, but the one we're interested in is circulation and transportation. And over time, our network gets developed because of this document. Now, with this document, you might be wondering, where are we currently at over the decades of refinement of the general plan? Well, at 1,000-foot level, this is generally speaking where we're at. Yes, we have sidewalks for pedestrians, we have public transit, we have a couple of Caltrain stations, some bus stops, and we have some bike lanes. But predominantly speaking, we're still a very vehicle-centric city. And what does that get us? Well, it gets us this network. About 90 traffic signals, over 200 miles of roadway, 7,000 streetlights, 380 miles of sidewalk, 63 miles of bike lanes, 3 Caltrain stations, over 190 bus stops, and about 80 bridges that we currently maintain in the city. But where are we going? Well, at a high level, again, this is not an exact science, but we want to have a more balanced network. One where more users use public transit, more people bike from destinations, vehicles are still integrated into the equation, and as, of course, people can walk to destinations in a viable manner. And why is this transition important? Well, it starts with sustainability again. We have limited right-of-way, and we're at the point now where we can't make our roads any wider, and we gotta find other means to get people from point A to point B, and the more vehicles we can get off the road means less carbon, less emissions, and that's all part of our plan and strategy as well. Next is efficiency. Our roads are clogged. The more vehicles we can get off the road, specifically single occupancy vehicles, into bike lanes or mass transit, means that we can utilize our network in an efficient manner. And then safety. I think this is oftentimes said, but we'll say it again, speed is oftentimes correlated to a high severity of incidents. This is one thing where cars actually has the largest differential in speed, potentially with pedestrians and bicyclists. So the more vehicles we could potentially get off the road to other modes of transit that are viable, the more safety that we could potentially increase. And then lastly is access. And we're talking about access in the terms of being able to have options. Not everyone can drive a vehicle, and if you present a network that has other modes, accessibility is increased. And there lies our mission. Internally, we're here to create and maintain a transportation network that provides safe, reliable, efficient mobility options for all users. So we discussed where we came from, we discussed where we're trying to go, and this is the mission that gets us there. But this is where the fun begins, and you might be wondering, well, how do we achieve this? And it really starts with the fundamentals of really 4 buckets that I want to discuss tonight. It starts with planning, and those are the documents, the guiding vision, the star that we kind of align ourselves with. Then we talk about the programs and policies that come from those plans. And then from the programs and policies, we then build infrastructure. And then once the infrastructure is built, we have to maintain and operate it to make sure that the network is actually reliable and functioning. So let's dive into the first one, which is planning. We have a lot of documents, and we mentioned a general plan. But the second document that's currently being worked at is the Complete Streets Project, and we'll discuss that more in depth a little bit later, but it is essential to get to where we need to go in terms of a multimodal network. We have our adopted bicycle master plan, our pedestrian master plan, a recently adopted transit-oriented development pedestrian access plan, and we have our traffic signal master plan and a rail corridor plan. We have other plans, but again, I can't fit it all in this slide. The one we want to talk about is Complete Streets, and I think a lot of you are aware. And what is the Complete Streets? Well, it is aligning with our vision moving forward. It's to create streets that are safe, comfortable, and accessible for all users in multiple forms. So it's taking a very vehicle-centric network that we currently have, and we're balancing it out to include options for bikes, public transit, increasing our sidewalks for a more comfortable experience, and so on. And why is it important, and why Complete Streets? Well, it really boils down to reducing congestion, improving safety, and really creating options. And this is something that we're working on internally. As you may get updates soon, but our principal transportation planner, Sue Ellen, is taking the lead on this effort. This plan is currently in development, and hopefully sometime in spring of next year, we'll have this plan completed, and we'll be on our way to a more sustainable future. Next, let's talk about some programs and policies that we have in Public Works. We want to break this down into 3 buckets, because there's going to be a lot. The first one pertains to multimodal infrastructure. Did it just go away? It did. Yeah, see, I don't know what happened. Thank you, thank you for your, we'll look at it at the big screen. All right, well, 3 buckets. The first one's multimodal infrastructure, and this pertains to actually building our network. So the bike lanes and et cetera. And next we have mode shift. And this is a programmatic as well as an infrastructure-based bucket. So you build the infrastructure, but you also have to educate and encourage as well for people to use it. So this bucket is similar to that. And lastly, you have maintenance and operations. Yes, you build it, you educate and people use it, but again, you have to maintain it. And this next slide is the universe of programs that we have in San Mateo. And here are 3 buckets that's in here. So if you look at this, it looks similar to a galaxy, but these are programs that we have in San Mateo. And each of these programs have hundreds of projects that reside in them. And the first one I want to talk about is the Traffic Action Plan. This in itself has over 200 plus projects just in one program. Then you look at one that's the grade separation program. We recently completed 3 at 25th, 28th, and 31st. Again, not a lot of projects, but that one project alone is in excess of $200 million. And then you have some projects in the mode shift bucket that contains your safe routes to school, your transportation demand management, your development review program, your parking policy program, and so on. And then lastly, we have a lot of programs and policies pertaining to maintenance operation because there are literally hundreds of thousands of assets that we have to maintain on a daily basis and 24/7. A couple of programs I want to dig into a little deeper pertains to the traffic action plan, one that we had discussed a little bit earlier today. So this one is neighborhood focused. It was started in 2017, and the outcome of this program developed 14 plans. And out of the 14 plans, about 140 top priority projects came out of it. But if you break that down even more, over 300 smaller projects came out of this program. And at a snapshot, this is how we're doing. About 187 of those items have been completed. About 44 remain. Now, I want to caveat that we are not including some of the larger capital-intensive projects. We could discuss those a little bit later, but in essence, we're doing pretty well in terms of our completion rate. Most of these projects, or all of these projects, are funded by Measure S, and we're estimating about another $1 million to complete the program, less of those capital-intensive projects. I want to note that there's about $12 million that is needed to complete the streetlight projects that are remaining. We have 4 photos here. The top 3 are some of the photos of recent completed projects. So we installed some temporary speed cushions in the North Central neighborhood, some speed feedback signs at 31st Avenue, and then some rectangular rapid flashing beacons in the downtown. Now, the project highlighted in green is one that we're currently working in development and design, and that pertains to the intersection of Alameda de las Pulgas and Hillsdale Boulevard. We are coming in here to install a traffic signal on all 4 approaches, and ultimately, we're here to optimize the traffic because there are a couple of schools in this corridor, and we want to optimize the corridor first, but also improve safeties for the pedestrians as well as mobility for the bike lanes in the area. We also have another program that we're currently embarking on right now, and it's our speed limit program. And there are really 2 goals of this program, and we'll dive into it a little bit deeper. But first is to reduce accidents and injuries, but also to improve flow. And one of the first projects we're doing for this is the school zone speed limit reduction project. In essence, what this project does is it takes all the public and private schools and all the adjacent streets that are directly near it, and we're reducing the speeds to 50 miles per hour. We started this back in December 2021 when we adopted a resolution to go ahead and do so, and we're currently in phase 1. We finished the design, we're in construction, and we should be done with construction in late summer, early fall. Concurrently, we're also starting the design of phase 2 of this project, and hopefully construction will be completed sometime next year. Another first of its kind for our city to reevaluate speed limits around schools, and one that would definitely have a lot of high value. But what about the rest of the streets? Well, there's another effort that we're doing, and it's the citywide speed limit program. And I want to break it down into really 3 phases. The first phase involves evaluating our network as a whole. As we discussed earlier, there are policies prior that had, over time, developed how our infrastructure and our transportation network looks like. But with that, it also determined our speed limits of where they're at currently. So what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate our entire street network as a whole. We are then redefining what appropriate speed means with our new vision and our new goal of where we want to go. And then lastly, of course, we're going to implement the appropriate speed limits. It's a pretty big, expansive program that we have, and it's a pretty lengthy one. This project kicked off a couple of months ago. We're in the evaluation period. So we're analyzing all the streets, developing the GIS network and the layers to identify which streets are appropriate. And we're going to be implementing new speed limits as we go along. So it's going to be a parallel effort. We're going to be evaluating and implementing, but of course, implementation will end after our evaluation period. And then I want to talk about a policy update that we're doing. And this one pertains to the Citywide Transportation Demand Management Ordinance update. So TDM is a way for us to manage and reduce vehicle miles traveled on the road, as well as trips that are coming in or basically out of our city. We have a $150,000 grant in partnership with the MTC to update our city ordinance to have more teeth, if you will, of transportation demand management efforts. Currently, we only have requirements in the rail corridor. So that's the Hillsdale Station as well as Hayward Park. When this effort's done, we will have a TDM program that's holistic to our city. So this effort kicked off just a couple of months as well. We're in the development phase, and hopefully by early next year, we'll be completed and adopted sometime this year, sometime this timeframe next year. So we have our programs and policies. I want to go over just a quick infrastructure project. But when we're talking about infrastructure to transportation networks, we're talking about mostly projects that pertain to the capital improvement program. We're talking about roadway reconstruction, high voltage replacement programs, a traffic signal modification program, bike lane installations, and we even work with other agencies in terms of highways and interchange modifications. One that I want to touch on is another grant, fully grant-funded project. This is a $1.7 million project that's funded by the ATP Cycle 5. No match, fully state funded. And what this does is it builds a protected bike lane on Delaware from 28th Avenue to Concord Drive. One that we are actively working on. Environmental has been completed. We're currently in the design phase, and hopefully by the winter of 2025, this project will be completed. Next, I want to talk about operations and maintenance, because oftentimes I feel like we have plans, they see the construction on the road, but behind the scenes 24/7 is a crew and a dedicated staff to maintain the network to make sure it's functioning and reliable. And some of the assets we talked about are very similar to the ones that's similar to infrastructure. Roadways, streetlights, traffic signal, bridges, bike lanes, sidewalks, etc. And I want to demonstrate just the amount of assets that our crews have to maintain. So what you're looking at here is a picture of a traffic signal. This is on 28th Avenue heading eastbound. And this is just one approach. If you recall, in our city, we have 90 signalized intersections, and this is just one approach. So assuming there's 4 approaches, that's over 360 of these approaches that we're looking at. And in here, there are a lot of devices that makes the transportation network function. Starting with this, it's our 3-section head. What most people know it as is a light that tells us to stop, a light that tells us to get ready to stop, and then a light that tells us to go. But internally, in terms of our O&M crew, we have 3 individual 12-inch LED lights that we have to replace. And they go bad all the time. And this is one maintenance aspect. We have signage. At face value, it's just a sign, but we have retroreflectivity requirements that we have to meet. And when we can no longer see and have the sign be visible, we have to replace it. We have video detection devices that are on the mast arm. This is, in essence, the eyes that notices the vehicles to optimize the actual intersection. And a lot of times the lenses get clogged, so we have to go ahead and wipe it and clean it. The devices go bad, we have to go up there and replace it. And we have a preemption device. This little thing that looks like a bird, if you will, is what speaks to emergency responders. This, in essence, gives the priority signal for, say, an ambulance or a fire engine to go through and gives the green light. So, a pretty essential part of emergency response. Then you have your safety lights, your street names, and then your pedestrian push buttons. And then this traffic cabinet is the brains of the operations. So this is what all of these devices ultimately route to and communicate to. And inside of this cabinet is something very daunting like this. There is the controller here. If you want to make timing changes, this is where you enter your differences and you go ahead and optimize the intersection. We have our communication devices here, whether it's copper or fiber, that talks to different intersections. And all of these assets have to be maintained 24/7, whether there's power or not, whether we have backup battery or not, whether it's communicating or not. And it's a lot. And this is just for signals. And we have 7,000 streetlights. We have a lot of roadways. So, and this is something that happens behind the scenes, 24/7. So we talked about our planning projects, our programs and policies, some infrastructure projects, and also what we do in O&M. This is a 2-year snapshot of some of the projects that currently is in the pipeline. If you notice, there are symbols here to represent what type of mode it works on, and you'll notice a trend. There are multiple modes in a lot of these projects. From the top, and I'm not gonna go through every single one, and there are ones that don't fit in this one digital page, but we have our pavement management program that has multiple phases. We're converting high voltage streetlights to low voltage. We're updating our TDM ordinance. We're working with different jurisdictions to increase optimization at the interchange of US 101 and Hillsdale. We're doing our speed zones reduction projects, phase 1, phase 2. 28th Avenue gap closure is a bike lane project that we're working on, another grant-funded project. We have our Delaware Safe Routes Protected Bike Lane project, all the way down to our speed limits and our slurry project. In essence, there's a lot going on right now in terms of updating our transportation network. And you might be wondering, well, how do we prioritize? Well, one of the metrics that we use is data. What we're looking at here is a heat map of aggregate of collision data over the last 3 years. Red represents a high density of incidents in San Mateo. Yellow means even more, and then blue means less. And if you don't see blue, yellow, or red, the incident is not in our registry, or there are no incidents there. And what we use this data for, is we overlay projects on top of it to prioritize where we should be working on based off of the data that's given. So if it's a safety project, obviously we're gonna focus on areas that has a high incident of collisions so we could go ahead and remedy that situation quickly. So we talked about a lot, and we have a strategy in place, and we have a lot of programs in place. But we also have challenges, because as much as I want to say, yeah, everything's going smooth, they're not. I think every organization and every group and team, we run into issues, and here are some that we've experienced. First is there isn't a one-size-fits-all. And what I mean by that is different parts of the city have different needs. They have different geometry, different curvatures, things of that nature. And you can't just plop one project to another. Different communities have different views. One community might feel really strongly about this, but another community might not. So there are differences. And a good example I want to discuss is installation of speed cushions. So on the left, you have a residential roadway that's in a residential neighborhood, so it's a local roadway. You have high pedestrian volume and low vehicle volume. This would be a really good candidate, as per our neighborhood traffic management plan, NTMP, to install speed cushions, right? You notice there's an issue with speeding, you did your speed survey and you realize that, go ahead and install it there. Your picture on the right is also a residential neighborhood, but it's next to an arterial. But you have very low pedestrian volume and high vehicle volume. And what that would indicate is this is designated to be a thoroughfare of some sort, and you're designing this to move vehicle traffic through. So because the picture at the left got a speed cushion, another resident might want one on the right. And if you do install speed cushions on the right, what may occur are two things. One, you may be presenting a safety issue because the predominant speeds there don't fit the profile of where a speed cushion would normally go. So you might catch somebody that's not paying attention, etc., to run to a speed cushion at very high volumes. Now, two, there's an unintended consequences And we oftentimes hear this, which is cut through traffic. Now, if we're designing a roadway, an arterial, to move a lot of volume at relatively fast speeds to get them into the freeway, etc., and you slow down the primary use, instinctively what happens is people want to find side streets. They want to find other routes to get from point A to point B. So the unintended consequences of installing a device that doesn't fit the characteristics of the neighborhood is cut through traffic is one example. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all. And we use, again, the data points, and this is a very data-driven approach, right? Speed comment, oftentimes people relate to it, from the public, from safety, and we take our safety map, and we see if there's a history of incident as well. So that's another data point that we use. Next, I want to talk about challenges of resources. So we have three fundamental kind of sections, if you will: planning, engineering, maintenance, and operations. And within those sections, these are the full-time staff that we have. So in all of planning and transportation, we have 2 FTEs. We have a principal transportation planner and an assistant transportation planner. You might be wondering, wow, we have a lot of plans going on, a lot of efforts. We have 2 FTEs. We do the best we can. In transportation and traffic engineering, we have 4 FTEs to deliver the projects, to design on the projects, to work with different agencies on projects that could affect our local network, and we have 4. And maintenance and operations, we discussed, the example about the traffic signals. And just in that one approach, we have a lot of different devices that we maintain. Overall, there are probably hundreds of thousands of devices in the city that we maintain. And we have 5 FTEs currently that does all this work. Now, again, this is, for some jurisdictions, this is a good size, but for a city that has 100,000 residents and growing and thriving, we're working the best we can with the resources we have, especially in a transition period. Speaking of transitions are difficult, right? We have existing infrastructure that are here. We discussed we have policies in place that created the existing infrastructure. So it's difficult. Now, if this was somewhere in the middle of nowhere and we're building a new multimodal network, I think it would be easier. But with existing infrastructure, it's always tough, and that results to trade-offs. There are always trade-offs in this transition. And I want to give an example here. So at the top, what we're looking at is how a vehicle-centric network is basically built out. On the sides, you have a sidewalk about 6 feet in width. Then you have 2 parking lanes there. In this demonstration, there's 7 feet. And then in the middle, you have 2 vehicle lanes that are about 11 feet. And a bicyclist is to share that roadway with the vehicles. Now we know, the differential in speed between a vehicle and a bicycle, oftentimes, if there is a collision, will lead to one that's higher in severity. But as we move towards our goal to have a more balanced network, a more multimodal network that's defined in a new general plan, our complete streets plan that we're working on, the TOD, Transit-Oriented Development Pedestrian Access Plan that we recently adopted, we might transition to something that looks like the picture at the bottom. Wider sidewalks, maybe instead of parking, we have bike lanes there. This is one option. And then the vehicle lanes are separated from the bicyclists. Something that's a little more multimodal. But again, transitions are difficult because we have existing infrastructure, existing policies. And as we have new policies and we transition, this is something that's difficult and we'll work around. And lastly, I want to talk about funding. We have a lot of programs in place, a lot of infrastructure to build. The longer we defer this, whether it be on the infrastructure timeframe or in maintenance, it just gets eaten up by inflation, and I think we all know how that goes. To give you an example of what this looks like, in our 5-year budget related to transportation-related projects, we have about $57 million that's budgeted. Now, again, I want to caveat that this is the 5-year budget, and a lot of times only the first and second year is kind of, definitive, if you will. But the 5-year projection is looking like we have $57 million that potentially we can use for transportation upgrades. our 15-year forecast for infrastructure, not holistic of every single infrastructure asset, but just the ones that we have plans that are defined for, is close to $953 million. That's $15 million for traffic signal upgrades, $60 million for annual bridge maintenance, that's annually, $27 million for ITS devices that we identified in our traffic signal master plan, $35 million identified in the bicycle master plan, $78 million that's identified in the 2013 pedestrian master plan, about 122 so far that's been identified in our pavement management program, and about 616 grade separations that we will need, and those are conservative estimates. It may increase even more as we prolong this. So the picture really that I'm trying to demonstrate is there will be a funding challenge as we move forward. All the policies and plans and programs in place can be there, but ultimately funding will be needed. So I want to end it on that note, and to recap the presentation, we are in a transition period, and we are heading towards a new direction to move away from a very vehicle-centric network to a multimodal future. We want to be clear that it won't be easy. There are challenges that are incorporated into this, but we do have policies, we do have programs, we do have projects that we're planning to deal with the transition that's in place. So with that, I'm open for questions. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Jay Yu, Engineer Manager with Public Works. Thank you for your time.
Jay, thank you very, very much. That was quite interesting. Why don't we do questions and then public, if there is any, and then comments after, if that works. Commissioner Owinski, questions?
Okay, Jay, I just, some questions I have. You mentioned ITS devices, and there was a budget of $27 million. What are ITS devices?
Yes, those are intelligent transportation systems, and oftentimes they're tied to our traffic signals. So why that's important is because as we are, the general theme of our network is we're running out of space.
Right.
You want to maximize every square inch of space that's available, and the technology that's included in ITSs, such as optimizing your intersections, your corridors, they're talking to each other, is very communication-based. And those devices will be essential as we optimize our roadway network, and there's going to be more modes that are traveling on it.
Sure. So since traffic is really a citywide phenomenon, and frankly, what happens in Belmont also affects us and vice versa, particularly what would be the southern end of San Mateo. So do these ITS devices communicate with each other, or do they communicate with their respective hardware?
Good question. It depends on the device, but there are devices that can do both. But the ones that really have high value are the ones that optimize the entire corridor. So you can communicate with multiple intersections. The goal in our traffic signal master plan is to have a connected network for all 90 signals. So we can go ahead and see where there is traffic at any given point, and we could on demand alleviate the traffic. But then there are also devices that does that automatically, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So anyway, and do we currently have some ITS devices installed? In fact, was it the traffic cabinet that you showed? Is that an ITS?
A traffic cabinet won't be considered, but it is instrumental in tying the ITS devices. I think one that we demonstrated is the video detection cameras in there. So those are the eyes to be able to see actually the vehicles that are stopped at the advanced stop bars. What's interesting about those devices too, you can have the capability of detecting bicyclists as well as pedestrians as well.
Right.
So those will be considered ITS devices.
Right, and those are the video detection devices that you showed that sit on a neck or a pole to optimize traffic patterns. But that information is then being sent to a traffic cabinet, and a traffic cabinet is talking to an ITS.
The ITS refers to the devices, the intelligent nature of it.
Got it.
A lot of that connects to the cabinet, but it talks to the controller. And then to get deeper, there are also communication devices and switches that you can use to transmit data differently. But in essence, all of the devices in that network are considered ITS devices.
ITS, okay, got it. Let's see, with the citywide speed limit program that's going to be implemented, or actually, let me just go back. Let's talk about schools. It's going to go down to 15 miles per hour when school is in session, and then 25 or whatever the normal speed limit is outside of schools. Does that have any impact on determining if speed, does that have any impact on determining any traffic calming, specifically speed bumps? Or so if you lower the street mile per hour, the speed limit, does that have any effect on how a street is determined to be eligible or not eligible for traffic calming devices?
Yeah, it would. Our current way of determining traffic calming devices is outlined in our NTMP. And what that does is we look at the posted speed limit versus our speed survey to look at what the 85th percentile is currently.
Right.
So you have to be 7 miles over the posted.
Right.
So in this instance, if you're lowering to 50 miles per hour, and that's posted, and your 85th is, say, 20, then it wouldn't qualify. But if it's over 22, so 7 miles per hour over the posted, then you would be. Now, that's under the current NTP, the way our policy is currently written now.
Now, isn't the current policy based on state law?
Our current policy is some, yes, there's a lot of that comes into play with that, but there is some details that within our city that we get to create in terms of having this policy fit our community.
Right. So you're saying there is room to customize to our specific situation?
To a limit.
To a limit, yeah, I'm sure there is to a limit, yeah.
To a limit.
To a limit, right. Because obviously, state law is put in place for consistency throughout the entire state.
Yeah.
And understand that. And as most laws are, there is some area of reasonableness you can navigate in. So you're saying, because I think it's actually tricky, by the way, if I look at the speed zones around schools, because I'm going to be having a hybrid speeding methodology. That is 15 when school is in and 25, let's just say 25 when school is out. So I'm sure the arithmetic will manage some of that.
Yeah, I think that's one I will double check on whether there is a variable speed, because we are changing the regulatory speed limit. So it's no longer a warning. That's something I could probably get back to you. It may be permanently at 15.
When you say permanently at 15, as opposed to adjusting
Exactly,
from 15 to 25, it just might be 15.
Yeah, that's something that I could get back to you on.
Sure, I had heard it would be 15 when school is in, and then bump up to whatever it is, 25, 30, when whatever that the nominal school speed limit is when school is out.
Yeah, I'll have to double check that.
Okay, that would be, because I would be interested in knowing that. And then finally, just a couple of more questions here. When doing speed bumps, I thought your example of low pedestrian volume and high vehicle volume was interesting, because that may mean that it doesn't qualify for a speed bump or speed bumps. I get a lot of questions on speed bumps from residents, so I'm going to focus on this. And so you also mentioned that you look at incidences. And what are incidences? Are they bike vehicle incidences, bike PED incidences, PED vehicle incidences? All of that would then also play into whether a decision is made to put a speed bump or not.
Yeah, definitely. Collision history is something that, in terms of safety, is kind of in the fabric of like every decision we make as we kind of look at installing a device. But in our collision map that I've demonstrated, it includes all types of collisions, whether it be pedestrian, vehicle, and bicyclist, and it's delineated in that nature.
Right. One last question. How do you measure pedestrian volume?
What was that?
How do you measure pedestrian volume?
Wow, there are a couple of ways you can do it. The traditional way is, yes, you have a person that counts, but now we have video that can actually capture a specific period, and we can take the video and break it down into an exact science, so where they're traveling, what time they're doing it. So it's more, how would I say it? It's more accessible in that way.
Sure. So when you're looking to do a speed bump on a street, that's when you might deploy not only measuring speed volume, vehicle volume and speed, you would then also have cameras to measure pedestrian volume.
Not always, but there are instances that we have done so.
Oh, included pedestrian volume
Yes.
in the decision as relates to speed,
Exactly.
the installation or not installation of speed bumps.
A lot of times when we look at pedestrian volume, oftentimes that's when we look at the installation of new crosswalks. So that's a lot of times where we look at pedestrian volume more so. But for speed calming devices, we look at speed as kind of the primary factor.
Right, and if it's within the 85% quartile.
Sure, and how that differs from the post-it.
Okay, great. That's my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Riddlemeyer.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I really enjoyed your emphasis on this transition to more multimodal types of transportation. And I really like that you point out the sustainability benefits, the efficiency, the safety, and the access, because not everybody has access to a car for a variety of reasons. I'd also like to point out also that getting out of your car and walking or biking, it also has public health benefits. It's healthier for us, right?
Yeah.
And also less wear and tear on the roads if you have lighter vehicles going on them. So maybe a little bit less money needed for maintenance further down the line.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So I do have a couple questions to follow up on the speed zone reductions near schools. You said that construction needs to be done. I'm just curious, what needs to be done that involves construction other than signage?
It's mostly signage.
Okay.
Yeah, it's mostly signage. Believe it or not, there's actually a lot of signs that are out there. And with that, there are, not really heavy, but there are foundations for the signs as well.
Okay, great. And are there any plans for how this is going to be enforced, this new speed limit near schools?
Yeah, so we have a pretty robust outreach program that we're working with the schools. It's multiple prongs, so we're going to reach out to school in coordination ahead of time. We're going to be coordinating with them before school starts and gets back in session. Concurrently, this effort, yes, led by Public Works, but it's also in partnership with our police department. So we have ongoing internal meetings that had occurred multiple times already, and we're getting them ready for this enforcement period, but there will be a grace period. Our outreach plan also includes messaging boards near the schools. So before school starts, to let them know that, look, the new speed limits will be at 15, so drive appropriately.
Okay. I live near a big middle school that's major, well, it's become a major road, even though it's not really meant to be. But it's not just school traffic that's going through there. There's a lot of traffic going, instead of going on 92, they take this parallel road. So I hope that the message gets out to the people who aren't just going to the school as well.
Yeah, definitely.
More about traffic calming. You talked a lot about the speed cushions or speed bumps. What are other measures for traffic calming that we use here in the city?
Ultimately, speed cushions is one that we utilize a lot. But recently, we had speed reduction markings, and those were installed at Franklin at the Bay Meadows neighborhood. And ultimately, what that does is it gives vehicles and drivers the perception that the lane widths are narrowing. So as a result, they slow down a little bit before a curb. So that's been utilized recently as well.
Okay, great. And I'm curious, as somebody who used to be a camera person and a camera technician, I enjoyed hearing about all the maintenance that you have to do at the traffic lights. How often do you have to change the bulbs or clean the lenses on the cameras?
Well, prior to the transition to LED, the working hours were probably like 2,000 to 5,000 hours. With our LEDs that were replaced, I think about 7 years ago, last time I checked with O&M, they should last a good 7 years, but in reality, I feel like we're oversold because it feels like we replace them more often. But in essence, you should have a 3 to 4x lifespan compared to the old incandescents.
And how are you notified when one of those needs to be replaced?
You know what? If we don't have communications in the actual intersection, a lot of times it's word of mouth. People let us know. They call our public works hotline, and then we go ahead and notify our maintenance crews, and they replace it.
Okay.
But in a connected world, we will have more, I guess, touch points on that.
And as far as the streetlights, you said that there needs to be about 12 million spent on streetlights. Is that for bulb replacements or additional lighting? What is that going
Those came from the traffic action plan, and a lot of communities requested that they have pedestrian-friendly lights in their neighborhood. A lot of subdivisions that were built in San Mateo only have lights at the intersections and not in the roadways and the streets in between. So one of their requests is to build brand new street lights in their neighborhoods, which could be quite costly.
Right. As a pedestrian who walks at night a lot, I am one of those who would like more lights in between traffic lights, so I understand, but that is costly, I know. Can you talk a little bit more about the car sharing and bike sharing? Maybe you did and I just missed it. What are the plans for that, and how far along are we talking to vendors, or what's going on?
Yeah, specifically in our city, we don't have a city ran program. When we were talking about bike sharing and car sharing, we were specifically talking about TDM measures that we impose on developers that come in, and we have, say, they're in the rail corridor, and there's a 25% trip reduction. Measures for them to reduce their trips could be implementing bike sharing programs at their facilities in their new mixed-use developments, or a car share program, and et cetera. So yeah, that's what I was referring to.
Okay, great, thanks. Thanks for clarifying. And I think my last question is about complete streets. And I understand that the idea behind that is to bring all these different plans together, the pedestrian master plan, the bicycle master plan, and others. A couple things. The pedestrian master plan, for one, I know is fairly old. It's over 10 years old now. So is that going to be integrated into the complete streets as is, or is there an update that goes along with that, or how does that work?
It will be a hybrid. There are some projects that are in the 2013 that it's still applicable, but we would definitely look at it with a new set of lens and eyes to see what warrants upgrading.
Okay. And looking at that 5-year and 15-year budget of, 15 years, $900 million, 5 years, $57 million. Is that based on all these different plans as they're separated now currently? Would those figures change, minus inflation, or times changing and the value of the dollar changing? Would that, if you could combine them into complete streets, would that make it more efficient as far as the funding goes?
It's hard to say. Those numbers were derived from taking the numbers individually from those plans, but you might notice some of those numbers don't have plans. For example, grade separation program. We don't have a master plan in place. So that's done by taking the existing at-grade crossings that we have, taking some estimated construction costs that we know because we completed a couple recently, and then extrapolating those numbers. So it's a combination of both. Combining them, in essence, I don't know if you'll gain any type of significant cost difference, but there might be economy of scale as you implement these projects. So if you build them together as one with multiple networks, there could be some economy of scale there.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Narita, questions?
Thanks. Hi, Jay. Wonderful presentation. It was actually also aesthetically beautiful, so thank you for that. as well as incredibly clear. I have several questions. The first one, I was really curious to understand, and I'm not sure if I saw it in the presentation, how does, the traffic team interface with the traffic teams in other cities or other agencies like, Caltran or whatever, and like the school board? If you could share a couple like anecdotes about that kind of interagency, intercity collaboration.
Yeah, definitely. There is a couple. There are conferences that we oftentimes attend in our professional nature that we congregate in. We kind of geek out a little bit and talk about traffic engineering, transportation planning, and so on. In terms of communicating with different agencies, we have a couple of forums that we do so. We speak monthly, sometimes even more frequently with Samtrans and our partners to talk about how we're building out our bus network. We communicate frequently with Caltrain as well. Caltrans, we work on multiple projects and we have, quarterly check-ins as well. So there are multiple touch points that we want to engage. And the purpose of that really is to see what they're doing, in essence, in the region, but also to kind of pitch some ideas back and forth to see if it works. A good example is our Smart Corridor Network. That's one that's ultimately managed by Caltrans, but it resides in San Mateo. So having those, quarterly, monthly touch points will let us know when the system's activated and et cetera like that.
Thank you.
Commissioner
Yeah.
Narita, if I may add, so the City and County Association of Governments, we have a monthly technical traffic advisory committee meeting, and that's really to look at regional planning and also opportunities for funding. And at those meetings, we do have Caltrans attend, for example, but that is a really good forum for public works directors to meet monthly to discuss overall transportation needs and funding.
That's fabulous. Is that where the El Camino project, for instance, with like San Carlos and Belmont?
So
sprouted?
part of the, right, so we rely on CCAG actually so during the storms, we did ask Caltrans to activate the smart corridor system, because if you recall, we did have an issue on 101 that required shutting down the freeway. So they are in terms of emergency planning and so forth, they are really the group that we rely on for coordination. But that brings all the public works directors together on a monthly basis.
Great, thank you. So last month we had a great presentation on the climate action plan, and we learned there that transportation emissions is 52% or 53% of our city's emissions, and we've only seen a very minuscule reduction since 2005, which is just disconcerting because we're making excellent progress on things like our building stock. I was curious, with the traffic plan, I really appreciate the nod to sustainability, but how do we actually meaningfully track and implement that within our city? For instance, should there be a GHG goal that we have that's specifically for that, 50 to 53%, saying something like, hey, across the nation, X% has been achieved with various mode shifting, so we should implement that in our city and try to get to that kind of a sub-goal. Something, because obviously the business as usual right now isn't working, and it's insufficient to rely solely on electric vehicle emissions, the lack of emissions from electric vehicles taking us to the finish line, because that just simply won't happen. So we need both, it's a both and situation. So I'm just curious your thoughts on GHG emissions.
If I can, sorry, Jay, if I can address, what Jay presented, represents a vision that is multifaceted, because we have to be. I think, as you all have seen, though, these transitions are challenging. And so I think it's a good discussion to try to figure out, should we have a specific goal on greenhouse emissions, but how do we make sure we achieve it? That is, to be honest, the biggest challenge, and that's why we do have multimodal projects. It does not get old for us to share with you the challenges with limited right-of-way. right? The trade-offs that Jay spoke about. I think the TDM ordinance that we will be working on will be pretty critical because that really relies on developers incentivizing their employees to take different modes of transportation. But we do live in a, sort of world where we're trying to manage an environment that was already built. So that's a hard question to answer in terms of what kind of metric we should adopt that could be effective. So right now we're focusing on trying to have a multifaceted, multi-pronged approach.
I totally understand. And I'm not recommending make a metric right now, but what is the process to potentially get council to look at that as something to consider? Because this is a glaring issue that's intersectional and within the responsibility of this commission, right? Because you're our staff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're asking too is for the climate action plan to show the effectiveness of past policies and what future policies we should be considering given the fact that we're not making a dent.
Yeah. Thank you. And going to the TDM ordinance, that sounds very exciting. I assume there's going to be lots of stakeholder engagement because that sounds like it can be challenging, for new businesses, but especially very, very important. Curious though, are there anything to be particularly cautious on, given the fact that we have a council that this plan, the plan to make this plan and ordinance came from a prior council, right? And now we have a new council. And so is there outreach and education happening with the new council on this ordinance? Because this seems, to the director's point, if this is the linchpin ordinance that we're working on for over the next 2 years that would actually meaningfully drive down carbon emissions from transportation, then this is the thing that we might need to make sure council is very well aware of.
Yeah, definitely. We have a robust outreach plan that internally, actually, we were just looking at, and we plan to present that to the commission. We're also planning to present it to planning commission and ultimately to city council. So we're hitting all the commissions and going to council. We're taking this very seriously. It is one document that, even though it's $150,000, it's not as expensive as some of our infrastructure. It does have a high value in terms of reduction and leading towards where we need to go. But to answer your question, yes, there's going to be a lot of education. There's going to be a lot of outreach specifically for that.
Great. And then on the Complete Streets plan timeline, has that gotten stretched out a bit? I can't remember because the outreach part was really fast in the Complete Streets presentation, but this one felt like there might be more wiggle room, or is not true?
It's a grant-based, so the schedule presented is based on the commitment to the grant.
Okay, so it's
it
still
hasn't
the
changed.
6 weeks ultra marathon outreach and education happening right now. You know what I mean? Because remember there was
We are
very
so
fast.
So a few things have happened since we last met. We also, in parallel, have a North Central Complete Streets effort. So we're actually right now working on aligning outreach in terms of what we have to do specifically in North Central, what we have to do on Complete Streets, as well as the general plan, as well as other efforts within CDD, as well as our stormwater fee effort. So we're working right now on an integrated schedule so that we don't confuse residents, because that's a lot to seek their input on and also provide information. So you are, the project itself in terms of the schedule and the miles, the main deadline has not changed, but we are reassessing and coordinating on all the other efforts and also with CDD.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you educate me on the North Central plan that you just referenced? I am unfamiliar.
Yes, so when we presented the Complete Streets to council, we were asked to do something very specific to North Central because of the removal of parking and the bicycle lanes. So we are doing a Complete Streets North Central specific plan that also includes a circulation element, so that we can see if there are other ways to move traffic through the area so that we can then assess, continue to assess the complete streets vision.
So sorry, I didn't watch the council meeting, you can see that. But is the North Central Complete Streets plan, is that contingent on the, is the regular full city complete streets plan contingent on the North Central one? Is that what council decided?
We are aiming to tackle both in parallel.
Okay, and is there anything in the North Central one that is not, in terms of facets, that is not in the, like the citywide one?
Yes, a circulation
The
study.
circulation is the only thing that is not in the citywide one. Okay, thank you. And you're welcome, public, for those of you who did not watch the council meeting. Sorry about that. Thank you, Director. Okay. Additionally, the traffic action plan, Jay, I was curious. You mentioned that pie chart was very impressive. There was like only 44 projects that remain undone. Curious though, what is the timeline for, like, what was, before the Complete Streets plan, what was the anticipated timeline of an update of that traffic action plan? So you said it was like 2017, right? Was it going to be like, it's going to be every 5 years, or it's going to be every, or we didn't have a plan for an update? Because I'm just curious, like, oh, are we on track with the 44 left, or is that ahead of schedule or behind schedule? I had no point of reference.
Yeah, no, good question. Originally, when the 14 was developed, I don't think, and just reading through the documents, it kind of predated myself, whether there was a time where this sunsets ultimately. But I do know that over time, we have actually added traffic action plans to the overall 14. So realistically, there are 15 now. So it's like a
scope creep. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of scope creep. So it's something that's happening as we progress, where we see there's a need.
Okay, great. So that there's like, we don't really know if they're on track or not in terms of timing, because there wasn't like an end date of like a goal. But it's still very impressive that out of hundreds of projects, there's only 44 left.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. I'm curious, for the speed limit projects, is there, a lot of the examples were about slowing down cars, which is completely makes sense. Is there any conversation about like creating more arteries where the speed limits would be higher, or is it mostly about slowing down speed limits and educating the public on the importance of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. As not specifically towards the school zone speed reduction.
No, not the school zone, but like
then
other
the citywide
ones.
effort,
Yeah, the citywide
one part of that is to reevaluate our network. And see where appropriate modes should be determined. And that's one thing that a Complete Streets plan would do as well, which is there are a lot of roadways, and I think our local collectors and arterials, the classifications are primarily based off of volume of how much vehicles you want to get through. As we transition to our more multimodal network, we're starting to look at not just vehicles throughput through a specific street, but we're looking at bicyclists, pedestrians, mass transit, etc. And that will change the way we look at speeds in essence. But to the citywide speed limit, we will reevaluate to see how those speeds align with our current vision that we're heading towards. So Vision Zero is something that we're all aiming towards. Reduction of speeds, if we think, speeds are a little bit too high, we do have the capability with new state legislation to say, okay, with a passing of an ordinance with our local jurisdiction, we can further lower speeds if we deem necessary. So that's another toolkit that we can use to lower speeds and ultimately that are tied to severity of incidents.
Okay, great. And then I really appreciated the clarity around the challenges that we face, and I'm really curious about some potential solutions to those challenges. So, for instance, in the city budget, is there effort or for more FTEs? This is my mantra on this commission: is like, we need more FTEs for things. City staff time is valuable, and if you want more stuff, you need more people to do the stuff. So, just curious, like, have there been budget requests for more FTEs? Have those been successful? Have they not? Is there growth projected? Is there not? Stuff like that.
Yeah, we have constant dialogue, and a lot of that happens through the director and during the budgeting process. Recently, we went and requested for more FTEs specifically to help out our transportation and traffic section. And good news, we were successful. in some of the
Not
requests.
yet. I always say this, not until the budget is adopted,
Not
can we
until-
say.
Not until the budget is adopted, so until it's written down in stone. But we have very positive discussions of where we may head towards. But to answer your question, we have those discussions all the time. But again, I think we know there are a lot of priorities in the city, and transportation is just one of them. So the decision kind of lies with another group of key stakeholders.
Yeah, and for the public, most city budgets, and San Mateo included, goes to police and fire. So take a look at your city budget, but it's fascinating that a lot of our taxpayer money goes to that, leaving very little for everything else we want to do in the city, including public works. I was curious about, additionally, where does outreach and education live? Like, who owns all of that? You outlined the FTEs in your program, the planning, the engineers, and the maintenance and operations. Like, is that in another? Does the CDD does all the public outreach then, or is there public outreach FTEs in your?
There, so
Department?
within Public Works, we have we do have a position for a communications analyst, and that role then coordinates with all the public information officers, PIOs from PD, our main city communications analyst, and our manager in our city manager's office, so Samantha. So there is a cohort, and we do have one position within Public Works to help us with the outreach and coordination with other departments on the messaging outside to the residents.
And it's one person for all of Public Works? Mm-hmm. Okay. That'll be a comment. Last question is about the federal funding then, because you mentioned funding and we're looking at, almost $1 billion of need over 15 years. I was curious, how does the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act intersect with some of the identified need in your presentation? So does that money flow to the state, and then does it come through state grants? Can any of that money be accessed directly? Just curious, because there's a lot of roadway money in there.
Specifically to that federal grant, I'm not too familiar with.
Well, the federal approach was to increase existing programs.
Okay.
So, even though we now have some of that money is going to be managed at the state level through existing programs. So
Okay.
we are seeing bigger buckets with respect to grade separations, for example. New programs have been created as a result of federal funds, and we have applied for 3 different grants and 2 new programs. So we didn't get the RACE grant. We didn't get the railroad crossing elimination program grant, which was new, but we did apply to CRISI, and we're waiting for
What's
the
that,
results.
Chrissy?
I will not.
You can just describe
the
it.
acronym, but it focuses on highway projects,
Okay,
and
cool.
and so separations are they're a category, fundable category under that program.
Great. Thank you. That sounds wonderful. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Cookie, do we have any speaker slips? Any yellow slips?
No, I don't.
Any hands raised online?
Anyone online, if you want to raise your hand? I've got Mike Swire, I'm sorry.
Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, thank you for making time, and thanks for considering this important topic. Thanks to Azalea and the team for all the great work that they do, and to the Sustainability Commission for looking out for the environment. I just wanted to make sure that I raise an objection to the focus of one of the focuses of the Complete Streets effort in North Central seems to be removing the bike lanes that were installed only a year ago and increasing the amount of parking in the neighborhood. Again, these were implemented, I think, just about a year ago, this time last year. I have 2 kids at San Mateo High School, and I see more and more kids biking and scooting to school every day. These are kids that are not driving in their cars, despite cars being cool for teenagers. I've got 2 of them, so I know. And I find it incomprehensible that we would potentially remove bike lanes that, one, HUD spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to help us build, and 2, are helping so many people get out of their cars and do the right thing. In a neighborhood that's historically been the highest crash rate in the city of San Mateo. It is not safe to bike there without the bike lanes. Even with bike lanes, it's still too scary for some. I know parking is difficult in that area, but parking is difficult for a bunch of reasons that can be fixed otherwise. There are people with 5 cars. There are cars that are not moved for weeks at a time. There are commercial vehicles that are parked illegally. There are spots that are blocked with cones by residents so that they can have private parking in front of their houses. In the end, however, it comes down to the convenience of parking on public right-of-ways compared to the safety of people who want to bike. And there's also an equity issue there, as Pam alluded to earlier. A lot of the people I see biking are not people in Lycra. They are 50, 60-year-old local Hispanic people that are trying to get to their day jobs. A lot of them are shift workers, and they can't afford the average cost of a new car in America being $45,000. And if you look at who's bearing the brunt of the traffic violence, it was a 68-year-old Hispanic man from the neighborhood who was put in a coma 2 years ago when he was hit by a driver prior to the bike lanes being put in. And as one of the commissioners mentioned, transportation is 60% of greenhouse gas emissions. And here we are potentially prioritizing the convenience of drivers over the safety of those who are trying to do the right thing. So I urge the committee to speak out to council and say this is not what we intended. This is not a good use of our funds, and let's do the right thing for our residents' safety as well as for the environment. There are plenty of projects that are higher priority than taking out bike lanes. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Any other hands raised?
No, I see no other hands raised.
Great. Okay, then I'm going to close the public comment period, and I'll come back to the commission for comments. And I'm going to step up first with comments. I just have a couple. One is, and it comes off this last speaker a little bit, though not necessarily in the direction that speaker might want it to go. But I think, you know, having been in this game now for a number of years, I think it would help if staff did more outreach and more neighborhood-specific outreach. It's tough. It takes a lot of person hours. But what we do see is the folks that tend to show up at meetings when they do, and we do have meetings that are well populated, tend to be activists, and God bless them, that's great, but that's not necessarily reflective of the needs and wants in any particular neighborhood. And I mean, I'll just give an example besides what happened in North Central, but multimodal, it sounds fantastic. And biking, it sounds fantastic. But when you go out to the neighborhoods, some of these neighborhoods could care less. And they are our citizens as well. And so, yeah, it's the council has a responsibility to lead, but they also have a responsibility to represent. And I certainly hear a lot of folks from certain neighborhoods who are more concerned about potholes being filled rather than bike lanes. And I'm not saying they're right, but I think we need to be very more neighborhood focused when we get our input. Somewhat related to that is I'd like to see us do a better job than we have sometimes in coordinating with the other, our neighboring cities. So we don't have a street that's been slimmed feed into a street that hasn't been and isn't going to be, or bike lanes that do a great east-west or north-south but don't connect, force you to go on a high-traffic street to get where you want to go in the next city. It's not easy. I am pleased to announce that for the first time in 25 years that I've lived on Barrio Ley, our city actually did a slurry seal of the entire street as opposed to just the San Mateo half or the Burlingame half, which Burlingame has done in the past. It's just weird, but it's great. Nice for doing the whole street. Those are my comments. Thanks. And let's go back to Vice Chair Rowinski.
Thank you. My comments are going to echo a little bit of the chair's comments. You had mentioned transitions are difficult on that slide, and they are. And they're particularly difficult for the neighborhoods that are going to be affected. And we really need to take their input in earlier in the process. For example, during the March Commission meeting where we did the bike update, there's 4 Class 4 bike lanes that are being proposed, and actually they're in the feasibility stage. It is the Delaware, the 28th Avenue Gap, and the 19th Avenue and Fashion Boulevard. And my understanding is that there will be some on-street parking that may have to be eliminated or moved or reduced. And so this is a perfect opportunity to work with those residents. We know who they are. They're in a relatively, it's not citywide, is to go and work with them and begin to understand early how we can also meet their needs. So once again, kind of echoing a bit of the chairs in terms of neighborhood focus. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Riddlemeyer, comments?
Okay, I'm going to build off what these 2 commissioners have said and counter them a little bit. I do agree about the neighborhood focus. I believe talking to the people where they live is very important. But as someone who likes to bicycle and likes to walk, sometimes I'm afraid to right now. And it's been shown worldwide, sometimes once you put the safe modes for people to walk or bike, you get more people walking and biking. So sometimes I think the danger is if we talk to people and ask them about their feelings about these multimodal streets, they might not be advocating for bike lanes and pedestrian safety because they're used to having their car because that's how they feel safe right now. But I think part of the outreach needs to be opening them up to maybe asking them, so how far do you go to the grocery store? Or, what are those little trips you're making every day to the drugstore, to the pharmacy, to the grocery store? How far is that? And could you, if there were a safe street or safer sidewalk for you, could you maybe walk or bike? And some people complain, but then I have to carry all my grocery bags and I can't do it. But if you incorporate that with your daily exercise, and you can make smaller trips more often if it's only a mile maybe, or a mile and a half, 2 miles. And you get exercise and it's safer and it's better for everybody. It's better for the wear and tear on the streets and everything. I think that should be maybe part of the outreach as well. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Narita.
All right. So thank you, Jay, so much for a lovely presentation again. And as you can see, this issue is incredibly exciting to the commission and really appreciate it. So the comments of the commissioners and the public comment, the root issue is the need for sophisticated outreach and engagement. And the proposed solution is more neighborhood outreach and engagement. I completely agree, but that is also an incomplete vision of outreach and engagement. So yes on more neighborhood engagement, more effort to change hearts and minds and to educate, instead of just, declaring things should be built for whatever reasons. Absolutely. And I think the Complete Streets plan and the consultants that we met seem to have a really great grasp on this kind of dynamic that we face and that all cities face in this transition of our existing built car-centric infrastructure. This is not a San Mateo unique issue. This is a ubiquitous issue across all of California, if not much of the nation. And so yes, on neighborhoods. I also think, though, that in that outreach and education of the neighborhoods, there's a fundamental disconnect sometimes between a person's individual lived experience and the lived experience of someone else that they don't see. So the person living in front of a bike lane might not use that bike lane, and instead they've just lost a parking space in their mind. Lost being an interesting word we'll get to. Lost a parking space, but they don't necessarily see the dozens of people, the hundreds of people who use the bike lane every day, every week, year after, hopefully year after year. And so there's that disconnect. So what do those folks get out of the situation? If they don't see the greater community benefit for these things, and that, yes, something's changing for them, but it creates a better vision and a better feeling for them as part of a community, that's where we lose them, right? Because it becomes a zero-sum game, like I've lost this thing, someone else has gained a thing. But instead, it's about how do we create actually a more coherent, cohesive, collaborative, collective community. That's a lot of C's. Somebody better write that down after, in the recording anyway. But the problem is that a lot of our society is so individualized now, right? Single family home, it's like our homes, we don't even know our neighbors, et cetera, et cetera. We don't know the person riding that bike. But how do we actually get people to emotionally engage on that level? I think it's really important. That's how we're gonna actually save the world. So anyway, in addition to public outreach and education, I think one thing we didn't touch upon here, but I've talked about in the past, is partnerships. How do we take advantage of partnerships with community leaders, with organizations, activists, as Commissioner Robbins mentioned, to help us in this effort? We are a very lean staffed city with one person in public works doing this outreach and education and coordination. We will not succeed. The entire the FTE count is set up to fail on public outreach and education as it currently stands, and that's not fair to the department. But that is the situation we are in right now. So how do we get creative and lean on partnerships? Yes, how do we lean on partnerships? I think also in that public outreach and education, there's a lot of need to educate people on shared resources. Right? The street is a shared resource. Going back to the idea of you've lost a parking space. I park a car outside of my house on the street. I do think of it sometimes as my spot, but it's not. It doesn't belong to me. I don't own that land. That's the city land. If they wanted to make me pay for that parking spot, they're allowed to. It doesn't belong to any of us. The street, instead, it belongs to all of us. And that's the weird thing. And that's the thing where outreach and education is so important, because no, the parking spot in front of your house does not belong to you. It belongs to all 100,000+ people who live in San Mateo. And that is a weird concept unless you really sit down and really hammer it. I shouldn't say hammer, really sit down and really engage with people on that level, that is a shared resource. Like the police, like fire, a police officer does not belong to you, but their time belongs to all of us. Similarly, on a side note, your sidewalk does belong to you. You are responsible for your sidewalk, which I did not know until a prior commission meeting. So, these things all can come together at the same time. Lastly, the importance of public outreach and education and partnerships has to be married with data to capture silent users. So here's the thing. The riders that use the bike lanes, many of them may come to commission meetings as activists. Many of them will not. They will never come. They might not even know that this commission exists. But their lived experience and their use of these infrastructure is not being captured because our system is set up to only capture what's in front of us, right? What's been told to us. So the only way to capture that is through data. And Jay, you mentioned there's cameras. Sometimes people stand there and like do a clicker. I don't know what it is, but we have to actually capture the data of the ridership of the bike lanes and the use of the pedestrian walkways, because without that data, everyone's going to think that nothing is changing and we're all still in our cars, and that is fundamentally untrue. But without that data, I don't know what to say otherwise. Like, just trust me. When I see people using the bike lane, you know, that's not going to change the person's individual lived experience. Who, when they look out the window, they've never seen someone use that bike lane. Never. And they're both valid and true. Okay, so that's on public outreach education partnerships and data. I do think we need a GHG discussion around traffic. I don't know where that starts. I would urge the council to consider this. We will not hit our goals long term. We might hit 2040 goals without this. I don't think we will. But we definitely need something on traffic because we have seen an abysmally small reduction. And as the director says, we're not making a big enough dent in this space. I do appreciate the comment from from Chair Robbins on the coordination with other cities. I will reiterate, Pacific, the bike lane is beautiful. I love it. It's so cool. And then you get to Belmont and you're in chaos again. And it's kind of scary. And I have seen many bikers on this bike lane. And then they hit that area and it's just genuinely very scary. I don't know, please more coordination because I just don't want someone to get hurt there. And lastly, on the FTEs, anything that the commission can do to encourage more FTEs, especially in the public outreach and education space for public works, I would be very game to support because this is a huge endeavor. You have many plans coming down the pike over the next several years, and I just don't see how it can all happen without more staff time to do this work. So thank you.
Very good. Thanks to the commission. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Azalea. Thank you, Cookie. We'll go on to reports and announcements. Anything from staff?
Yes, so just sharing that on May 21st through the 27th is National Public Works Week. We are this Monday night working, our council will read a proclamation acknowledging the hard effort that our staff and from our admin staff, from our engineers, our traffic safety workers, our wastewater treatment plant workers, all our crews do every day. So we'll be celebrating next week. Well, at council on Monday and then celebrating the following week. So think of us.
Will, thank you. And I'll make a small announcement. Starts in June, so I'll bring this up again next month, but June 22nd, the music series in Central Park is back in full force, and the little but mighty Parks and Rec Foundation will be selling beer and wine. Go buy, the money all comes to the city, helps Park and Rec, but it also helps the whole city. So that's just a little pitch. Anything else? Yes?
A very small one, just appreciation and sharing that on Pacific, at the intersection of Pacific and Hillsdale, 2 commission meetings ago, I had flagged that there was no delineation between the street and the bike lane. 1 commission meeting ago, there was a sign. Now there is, looks like a quick build bollard situation happening so that it's very clear how bikes and cars can interact at that intersection. First of all, expressing deep appreciation for that. And 2, yay, Public Works. In light of the celebration next week, this is one example of engagement and really quick acting. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Do you have something to add?
I do,
Please.
and I'm still kind of new in this commission, so I don't know if this is the time to say this or not. But One Shoreline, which is the county agency that is looking at sea level rise and flood issues along the bay shoreline and the coastal shoreline throughout the county, just came out with a planning document that is under the draft is under review for open for public review until May 19th. I'm wondering if that would be an appropriate issue to have presented to this commission or to the city council or to the planning commission, but I'd like to have one of our commissions or committees have a presentation by One Shoreline folks.
We can make that request. We actually were one of the few cities they actually asked before that document was made public. We did provide a lot of input, but we can definitely have them come back to also update you on future projects as it relates to the capital budget that will be adopted. We did request funding to develop a San Mateo specific adaptation plan. A lot of the challenges we have here in San Mateo relate to the 3-mile existing levee system that we do have. So, but we can definitely ask them to come and present here or council. I can follow up on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. We are adjourned. Cheers.